Secretary of State John Kerry announced today, or earlier this week I should say, that Syria has made good on their promise last fall to hand over their stockpiles of chemical weapons and chemical weapon precursors to the United States. That was finished earlier this week. In fact, Syria has handed over the remaining 100 tons of toxic material it declared to the global chemical weapons watchdog, clearing the way for destruction of the stockpile at sea. The chemical cargo is being shipped to a specially modified U.S. naval vessel, the MV Cape Ray. And as we speak, that naval vessel is doing the hard work of actually disposing of the chemicals. Now, the 100 tons referenced in the previous graphic represents 8%, the last 8% of Syria's chemical weapons stockpile. And according to John Kerry, this is amazing news. They have made good after they were threatened last fall by President Obama. I personally don't know how much you can trust them in the middle of a massive, Syria-spanning war to hand over all of the stockpiles and all of the precursors. But the Secretary of State is saying that this is a major victory, at least.
I have two things to say about this. First of all, I can't hear the word vessel without hearing Chekhov in my mind. I think all Star Trek fans agree with me. It is a vessel. Okay, anyways, now on to serious stuff. Seriously? Okay. Okay, what happened, Obama critics? I was led to believe you made a stupid deal with the Russians and you got tricked, Obama. They're not going to hand over the chemical weapons, you dummy. Oh, we told you. Oh, they handed over all of them? Benghazi!
They're probably just being gathered up to be delivered to ISIS rebels right now.
Right now. So, will we ever get an honest conservative again in this country? Will a single conservative stand up and say, hey, our bad, sorry about that. It turns out they did give all their chemical weapons. Just as they had promised, and the deal that you made with them. Now, there's still a lot of hard work to do in destroying the chemical weapons sites, right? The weapons are gone. We want to make sure they don't build them again. That's going to take an extra long process. But and they've missed a couple of deadlines here and there. That's when conservatives went and said, they missed a deadline. The Syrian bureaucracy is not up to snuff, right? But they've turned over all the weapons. What now? What now? What now? So, conservatives, fix your face.
Now, I know that you're joking and like how happy you are, because we have to bear in mind that while we got sort of what we want, or at least what we stated we wanted in the deal, when Obama was considering launching airstrikes against Syria, this seemed like a pretty good goal. We decided we were not going to get involved in the internal politics in a more substantive way in terms of sending troops in. But there have been consequences to that. Yeah, we got the chemical weapons handed over, but the Syrian regime has shown that they can kill tons of their citizens without resorting to chemical weapons. And so as a result of the deal, hundreds, thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of Syrian citizens have died. And we've seen that close to 10 million Syrian civilians have been displaced from their homes, either internationally or within the borders of Syria. And so we can celebrate to some extent. It's certainly better. I don't want Assad to have chemical weapons, but there's still chaos reigning in Syria.
You know, that's interesting. I think that when we first had the discussion, it was me, Jimmy, and Michael that I think were the spectrum, if I remember right. You didn't want to go in at all, Jimmy?
I didn't want to crow or whatever. I don't want to pat myself on the back. But yes, right. I was the one who was against missile strikes to try to fix the problem in Syria.
Right. And I think Michael was on the side of more likely to go in. And I was kind of torn, but I think I leaned towards Michael. And there was a point, there was a brief point, because before I didn't think they laid out the case well enough. And then afterwards, it became a disaster. But there was a critical point there where I was leaning towards going into Syria for the reasons that John just stated. Look, we've had all those civilians die. We've had 10 million people displaced. Yes, we got the chemical weapons out, but it's a disaster. Okay, now let me tell you how I have evolved on that. So, I just got in conservatives' face for not recognizing the facts, etc. John, I see the facts you presented, and I've gone the other way. I've gone towards Jimmy. Okay, it turns out it was a monumental mess that we couldn't have possibly fixed, okay? And I criticize President Obama all the time, right? But actually on this set of foreign policy, not on the drone strikes, not on Afghanistan, not on 100 other things, right? But on these two things, I've probably defended him the most, which is Libya. Liberals don't like Libya, conservatives hate Obama, so hence they don't like the bombing that happened in Libya. But I think that it was relatively successful. Gaddafi, the dictator, is gone. What's replaced him was never going to be great, right? But it's better than the 40-year-old dictator, meaning like he was dictator of the country for over 40 years. So now, and in Syria, I thought he was right to really be on the fence on it and then be careful and then pull back at just the right time. Got a good deal, and I've always been in favor of this deal because I thought, well, look, if we say we care about the chemical weapons and they're giving their chemical weapons away, on that limited note, mission accomplished. Give the guy credit where credit is due. And now, I mean, if you thought Iraq was bad, if we're in the middle of Syria,
it would be a disaster. But remember, there was a lot of reluctance with the Obama administration in accepting this deal, especially considering the fact that the Russians were the ones that kind of got in the middle and worked with the Syrians and the United States to make this deal. So I'm happy that this happened, and it is a good example of a negotiation going well, using diplomacy as opposed to missile strikes to solve a situation. And look, it all depends on what your idea of our U.S. military is. Is our U.S. military there to protect Americans, or is it there to go into other countries and intervene? I don't want to go into other countries and intervene. And in this particular case, Americans didn't want to go into Syria and intervene. Poll after poll indicated that. So I'm happy with the way that this turned out.
I'm actually a bit of a mild interventionist. We've talked a lot about that on the show, okay? And I was in favor of the first Persian Gulf War. I was in favor of Afghanistan in the beginning. Obviously, as I just said, I was in favor of the Libya action. I'm now leaning away from that, okay? Because circumstances dictate what you should do. You should be open to facts. And the situation has changed since the first Persian Gulf War dramatically, right? And the situation we have in the Middle East now is a hot mess. So whose side are we going to intervene on? The Iranians or ISIS or the Sunnis or whoever the
different Syrian rebel faction?
Yeah, I mean, I defy anyone to figure out who the Syrian rebel factions are, let alone which side of those factions we should back with what, right? So I'm now leaning towards Jimmy and Anna in that I'm mildly anti-interventionist now. Like, we've intervened enough in the frickin' world, okay? So I wish we had the power to fix the situation in Syria so that all those people didn't die, but we do not have that power. Right, and we shouldn't pretend we do because it's only going to make it worse.
So when you say you wish we could have people saying intervene in Syria. Well, we wanted to intervene in Syria with were bombs. Somehow that was going to somehow fix the problem over there that we can't. But the problem over there is a drought. That's what started all this problem in Syria, is that there was a drought and people started starving and the economy went to shit and they started protesting and then they overreacted to the protests and that's where we're left with a civil war. So, there's a drought, let's bomb them. No, how about we figure out how to get water there? And, they went to the international community to try to fix their drought before this civil war happened. And still, John Kerry still refers to that. He says after this is what I love. He goes, the worst of the weapons are gone, but this despicable regime and the crisis it has, just stop it with the despicable and your fucking over-the-top rhetoric about these people. He's worse than Hitler and Saddam, and now it's Syria, and then ISIS is even worse than Al-Qaeda. And can we just say they're all jagoffs? Can we just get it? All right, every one of them, okay? And we got them here. We got George Bush and Dick Cheney and everybody who started that war. They're just as despicable as anybody else. So can we just stop it with that rhetoric? It just makes him see. So now he can't trust John Kerry ever when he says stuff like that. He's still throwing. They got rid of their chemical weapons, like you asked them, and they're still despicable. So,
but he is still killing civilians en masse. The only ones he doesn't seem to be able to kill are the ones who fled to other countries.
And how
now,
many?
I don't think that we should send in the Marines or
everybody.
anything. Well, yeah, I think in some sense, I suppose. And the drought thing is certainly true, but it's also a drought in a country that has been ruled by a familial dictatorship for multiple decades. Theoretically, we could have gone in. If we could have, instead of going into Iraq, we could have gone into Syria. The Syrian military is nothing compared to what the Iraqi military was at the time that we invaded. In terms of ground troops, they had something like the fourth in the world. I mean, theoretically, we could have done that instead. I'm somewhat like Cenk. I'm a mild interventionist, but it's not a philosophical thing for me. It's pragmatic. If they have a very large military and we get bogged down, I wouldn't want to do it. If it's relatively easy and we can move in, as we have in any number of humanitarian missions that we've engaged in throughout U.S. history around the globe, there's humanitarian missions we're in right now. Thankfully, they're not military. There's certainly good that we can do in the world. It's just if we're going to get bogged down in a civil war where none of the sides engaged in it seem to have the best interests of the Syrians, let alone Americans at heart. That's the main reason I wouldn't want us to have gotten involved in Syria. If it was truly a citizen-backed rebellion, a unified rebellion that was working to take out the Assad regime, perhaps I would have backed it. But what would we have ended up with if Syria had been in control, or if ISIS had been in control at the end, or one of the other al-Qaeda sort of related rebel groups? We'd be no better off, and more importantly, the Syrians would be no better off.
I'm for intervening here in the United States.
100%.
I say let's intervene in Detroit, then we can move our way around.
I like the Bosnia action. I know that I'll get tweets and emails. You misunderstand Bosnia, and it was actually terrible. And no, it wasn't. Okay, it was messy, and it's not as pretty as the media necessarily paints it out to be. But overall, it was a really good thing that we stopped killings there and settled the situation, et cetera. Right. So, but John is right. It's very hard to find just the right circumstances where practically we can actually get it done, right? And it makes sense ideologically, and it doesn't cause a bigger mess. Right now,
philosophy.
Yeah, and that's right now all over the world. There just isn't that many situations like that. Most situations would cause an even bigger mess once you start bombing them, because bombing them is very rarely the right answer, right? Instead, they think in Washington that it's almost always the answer.